everyone. Oh, I miss you, Toronto. I'm so happy to be here and to share the stage with this incredible lineup. I mean, what a lineup. I say we take this show on the road. What do you think? I want to thank you, Maya, for being such a brilliant MC, and the whole crew from Raw. That was just heart-poundingly brilliant. I want to thank Wanda for welcoming us to this territory and say what an honor it is to be here with Pam and David, who are just such incredible heroes, and we are so fortunate to be in this struggle with them. We have talked a lot about the power of young people in this moment and the incredible energy being injected into the climate justice movement by the youth climate strikers who have called on us to join them on September 20th, and we are going to be there. We need a general strike for the climate. We need our trade unions to do what they do best and organize and go on strike with us. And so I want to honor these incredible youth organizers, and we're going to hear from Our Time. I am their warm-up act at the end of the evening, so don't you leave after I'm done. But in this time of all of us being so inspired by this wave of youth organizing, I want to talk a little bit about movement elders. And I was really struck by this, listening to David. I heard David Suzuki speak 20 years ago when he said to us that our economy was a runaway car without the brakes, going straight towards a brick wall. He tried to warn us. And he has been warning us for so long. And as somebody who's been trying to warn people for like a fraction of that length of time, I just want to say it takes real stamina to stay in the fight for that long. And we are grateful, because it's painful. It's painful to be warning and to be marshaling the facts and to not be listened to, right? I want to acknowledge another elder in the room in this struggle, and that is my amazing father-in-law, Stephen Lewis. I'm going to make him stand up. Stand up, Stephen. You know that guy. You know that guy. We know that guy. In 1988, Stephen chaired the first intergovernmental panel about climate change when he was Canada's envoy to the United Nations, ambassador to the United Nations. The very first meeting. Later, the IPCC was formed. If we had listened back then, the things that we needed to do would have been a lot gentler, right? But we didn't listen. So I just want us to take that moment and think about the elders in this room, in so many Indigenous communities who have been warning and teaching and not being listened to. It's hard. I want us to thank them for still being part of our struggles, for not giving up on us, for not giving up on human potential. And I want us to make a sacred promise tonight that we are going to be the ones who listen. Can we do that? Can we be the ones who listened? Because it is not too late. We have lost a lot. There is a lot of grief, as Pam so vividly brought into this space. In our species, in other species, we feel that grief, but we have not lost everything. There is so much still to fight for. I want to quote my friend Nina Turner, who was part of the Bernie Sanders campaign and chair of the Our Revolution movement in the United States, who've been putting forward all of these young democratic socialist candidates. She says, all that we love is on the line. All that we love is on the line. That's what we're fighting for. And that's why our elders don't give up on us. And we are going to be the ones who listen. So, we've heard a lot about the epic nature of the challenges that we're up against and the deep need for transformation, not just in the way we treat the natural world on which we all depend, but also in the way that we treat one another. If we expect to stop treating the planet as if it's trash, then we have to start treating so many people who live on this planet as if they are disposable. Whether migrants seeking asylum or kids in our resource-starved public schools right here in Ontario under attack by the Ford government. And all of this begins with a revolution of respect for Indigenous peoples, the original caretakers of the land, water, and air. Ecological unraveling will lead to the extinction of countless peoples and cultures around the world. Knowingly allowing this to happen, which is what all of our governments are doing, is genocide on an unimaginable scale. They cannot claim ignorance. They signed the Paris Accord. The mindset that makes this planetary scale crime possible, one that puts profit and greed above all, is the very same one that waged genocidal attack on Indigenous people in this country in order to lay claim to their land with the war on Indigenous women and girls, but one front in that ongoing war. The seizure of those lands in order to feed a global economic machine of infinite growth and consumption began the process we now call climate change, alongside the seizure of African bodies as free labor and many other crimes of the industrial age. These are not separate or separable issues. They are different chapters in the same story. And as Pam said, now that cruelty is trickling up. Remember, we were told, oh, yes, some disposable people here, there, some disposable land there, but eventually it's all going to trickle down and everyone will be lifted up. No, that's not how it worked out. In fact, the opposite happened. Those crimes, those original sins, trickled up, and now they are swallowing the planet itself. What this means is that if we want change, we are going to have to go deep, down to the roots of these overlapping crises. And we need to do it on an emergency basis, because our house is on fire. But here is the thing we must always remember. That house, built on toxic ideas of sacrificial people, discounted futures, and the false promises of infinite growth and expansion, was rigged to blow from the get-go. So let's put out the flames and let's build something different in its place. Something a little less ornate, but far more beautiful, with room for all who need shelter and care. Let's build a Green New Deal, this time for everyone. That's why you're here, right? You're not here to listen to speeches, you're here to get to work. And we have a lot of work to do if we're going to put this idea out into the world and if we are going to win. Now, the first thing to understand is there is no binder with the exact recipe or policy prescriptions. We are going to have to develop that democratically from below. But we have the rough idea. The Green New Deal is, quite simply, a proposal to address the climate catastrophe at the scale and speed that science and indigenous knowledge have told us again and again and again is required. And it also means putting the burning need for social and economic justice at the dead center of this project. So we have the rough outlines of what this means. It means that in Canada, we're going to have to be cutting our emissions at least in half in a decade. So let's pause to imagine how that could happen. It would mean moving immediately to 100% renewable energy for electricity, and then electrifying everything, mass transit, manufacturing, home heating, agriculture, everything. It means epic investments, not just in clean energy, but also transit, housing, a deindustrialized food system, art, culture, and truly universal 21st century public services. A transformation that begins with the most excluded people and the most polluted places on the front lines of this crisis. And that has front lines first. In this way, as our friends in the Sunrise Movement like to say, the Green New Deal is not an environmental policy. It is an entirely new system of governance for the 21st century. And the level of public investment, of public ownership, and free universal public services that the Green New Deal entails means something else too. It means we have on our hands the greatest anti-austerity program that we could ever imagine. And we need that. If we embrace this vision that science and justice requires, it will bury the logic of endless cuts and privatization for good and bring us a giant step closer to a system that is based on entirely different values, one in which caring for the earth and caring for another are not afterthoughts, but the overriding, overarching goals of every aspect of our economy. That is what the Green New Deal is. So that's big. That's a big plan. And how do we do something that big? I think the first thing to understand, and I think a lot of you get this, is that you don't just leave it to the market with a mix of incremental incentives and barely there taxes. Because let's get real. Only a federal government with the power to issue its own currency would be able to marshal the vast resources necessary for a climate-saving transformation on the scale that we're talking about. The trouble is that there isn't a government anywhere that we can trust to get this right, which is a bit of a problem, wouldn't you say? So what we actually need is a takeover of the government for the many, not the few. But as Pam said, this is not even primarily about electoral politics. The truth is neither governments nor markets are going to be the protagonists of this story. This is what makes it different. People are the protagonists of this story. The people in our movements who will fight to make the Green New Deal happen, and the people who will directly and immediately benefit from the results. The workers who will build the new infrastructure, the residents who breathe the clean air and drink the clean water, who will live in the new affordable green housing and benefit from the low cost, or better yet, free public transit. It needs to be led by the communities who will shape the process at the local level, neighborhood by neighborhood, town by town, First Nation by First Nation. So, we're talking about building a mass movement powerful enough to elect and hold accountable a government that will turn our vision into law. That's how we win a Green New Deal. And there is no use pretending that this is anything but a vast undertaking. We haven't actually done this before. But we need to remember how far we have already come. Just a few months ago, the only thing that passed for a climate debate in this election year was a cartoon-like wrestling match between a government that had bought a pipeline as part of its so-called climate strategy and a fossil-fueled opposition over a totally inadequate carbon tax. In other words, the people pretending to do something versus the people who want to stop even pretending. What a sorry lot they are. Now, in just a few short months, movements have come together to inject the Green New Deal into the election conversation. Students are walking out of class in the hundreds of thousands. 2 federal parties are competing to claim the mantle of climate transformation. Cities and towns are declaring climate emergencies. And, as you heard, more than 200 Green New Deal town halls have been organized across the country, thanks to 350 and the Our Time crew. This is stunning progress, but of course, it's not enough. Not given the scope of transformation required, and not given the surging tide of right-wing racism and xenophobia that is rushing to fill the leadership vacuum created by the liberals with all their posturing and pretending. Which means we need to up our game right now and make this election year a turning point. Now, my job here tonight is to get you ready for the battle, to arm you with facts and arguments to be Green New Deal ambassadors, mobile persuasion units, because we know we can't trust the media on this. You're going to have to get out there. We need special envoys for the urgent transformation of late capitalism into a cooperative commonwealth of climate safety and solidarity. That's your new title. Do you like it? My goal is for you to leave here this evening feeling 100% ready to go door to door, explain this to a friend exactly what the Green New Deal is and how we're going to win it. I want you to slay online oily trolls. I want you brimming with confidence to do rhetorical battle with lazy journalists. All of the above. So to that end, I want to share with you just 5 good reasons why the Green New Deal is workable, winnable, and an idea whose time has come. Are you with me? 5 arguments. I don't have time. I could do 10, I could do 15, but we're going to do 5, all right? Reason number 1, the Green New Deal will be a massive job creator. It will swell the ranks of unions and increase workers' rights, especially the most vulnerable workers. We know that investments in renewable energy create many more jobs than investments in fossil fuels, up to 24 times more jobs for every dollar invested. And when you start thinking about the rest of the low-carbon economy, the green jobs that don't always get counted as green jobs, in healthcare, in education, in the arts, in other low-carbon work that dramatically improves our quality of life, then the job creation potential is even greater. At the LEAP, we always say, care work is climate work. So, when we talk about the programs that would make the Green New Deal, like retrofitting every building in Canada in a decade, building hundreds of thousands of new units of public and non-market housing, making free transit a reality in every community in the land, universal daycare, dental care and pharmacare, and reinvesting in education with thousands of new teachers to lower the outrageously large class sizes in this province. We are talking about creating millions of family-supporting, low-carbon jobs. And while we're embarking on the greatest job creation program in our history, Why would we not simply make it a goal to double the unionization rate in Canada, extending collective bargaining rights and protections to those millions of workers? And more, how about a federal jobs guarantee with at least a $15 minimum wage, as well as decent benefits, holidays, and pensions? That would set a floor that would entirely change the dynamic between all workers and employers. Because if you're a fast food or a temp agency worker and your employer knows you can walk out the door into dignified work with a living wage at any time, they'll have to think twice before splitting your shift and stiffing you on overtime and denying you the right to go home when you have a family crisis. And this is the state of exploitation, fear, and precarity that characterizes working life for too many today. And this is the kind of game changer a Green New Deal could be. So when people tell you that the Green New Deal will hurt workers, and they will tell you that over and over again, I want you to set them straight. Tell them that the Green New Deal is a job program of epic proportions, a tool to fight for working people across this country that will leave no worker behind. That's reason number one. Reason number two, why the Green New Deal is practical and winnable. Ignoring the climate crisis will bankrupt us, but the Green New Deal is our chance to create a much fairer economy than we have right now. According to the IPCC report from last October, the economic damages of allowing temperatures to increase by 2 degrees hit $69 trillion globally. That's 2 degrees. We're not headed for 2 degrees. We're headed for at least twice that. Of course, rolling out a Green New Deal is going to be expensive too. Not that expensive, but there are big costs here. Here at home and also internationally, because Canada owes a climate debt. We owe a climate debt that we need to pay to the global south, to the countries that have done very little to create this crisis, but are on the front lines of dealing with the flooding, with the super typhoons, with the loss of coral reefs, and with drought. So we owe a climate debt, and we need to pay that debt. So we need to talk about how we're going to raise the money. And luckily, we live in a time of unprecedented private wealth where billionaires can think of nothing to do with their money than go to Mars to escape the mess that they've made behind. And we have better ideas of what to do with their money. We're going to save this planet right down here. And luckily, there are many financial tools available to us, ones that can generate the financing we need while attacking the obscene levels of inequality that scar our society. For too long, we've had climate policies that dumped the burden of paying for transition on those least responsible and those least able to pay, while continuing to let millionaires and billionaires off the hook. That's precisely why it has been so easy to stir up populist backlashes against carbon pricing, from France to Alberta to right here in Ontario. Moving forward, fairness in climate financing must be non-negotiable. And that means one thing. It means the polluters pay. It is not hard to figure out, that's right, a little bit more. The polluters pay. We know that a whopping 71% of total greenhouse gases since 1988 can be traced to 100 corporate and state fossil fuel giants, dubbed the carbon majors. We know their names, we know their addresses. We also know that almost 50% of global emissions are produced by the richest 10% of the world's population. Any climate policies that are going to be backlash-proof have to reflect this reality. And there are plenty of policies like this to choose from. We could increase royalties on extraction, which I might add the NDP government in Alberta should have done on their first day in office and didn't. We can slash their absurd subsidies. We can sue them for climate damages, or we could do all of the above. And we could redistribute the money to pay for a Green New Deal. Of course, it isn't only the fossil fuel companies that have put their super profits ahead of the safety of our species for decades. So have the financial institutions who underwrote their investments in full knowledge of the facts. Canada's financial sector, so much of it based right here in this city, averages almost $50 billion in profits every year, and the vast majority of it is not reinvested in job creation or in the productive economy. It is hoarded and gambled in the great casinos of Bay Street and Wall Street. A financial transaction tax is long overdue, and this fractional tax would generate billions, but even just getting corporations to pay their damn taxes to finance a Green New Deal would represent a vast rebalancing of our unequal economy. An investigation by the Toronto Star and Corporate Knights found that if Canada's top 100 corporations just paid their taxes at the average federal provincial rate of around 26%, which is too low, you'll have an extra $10 billion in public revenue each and every year, and more. There's an equivalent annual amount that we're losing to Canadian corporations hiding money in tax havens, and we caught a little glimpse of that with the Panama Papers. Which means that cracking down on the hoarding class and their tax dodges would, on its own, generate up to $25 billion a year. That's a hell of a down payment on a Green New Deal, and it would begin to tackle inequality head on and restore a little bit of balance and sanity in this economy. So you tell that to anyone who tells you we can't afford a Green New Deal. We can afford it. We have to have the courage to do what so many political parties in this country refuse to do, which is to go where the money is. I want to talk concretely about what this could look like in just one case. I'm sure many of you saw those frightening and enraging headlines about how the cost of cleaning up the mess left behind by Alberta's aging oil and gas infrastructure would cost at least $260 billion to clean up the mess. We also learned that at the rate that industry is currently cleaning up that mess, it would take 2,800 years. That is 93 generations to get the job anywhere near done. That is simply not acceptable. That is arson. That is planetary vandalism, and we will not stand for it. Under a Green New Deal, here's what we're going to do instead. We would make oil companies pay a significant share of the billions and billions in profits that they pull out of the Alberta tar sands year after year, so that we could put tens of thousands of people to work in the oil patch, cleaning up the wreckage of a century of extraction, pollution, and profits. The Alberta Cleanup alone could be the biggest job creation program in Canadian history. That is the central argument of Reagan Boychik's visionary organization, Reclaim Alberta, which the LEAP has been proud to partner with from the beginning. So when we think about the kind of transformation we need, it is not just about managing the decline of oil and gas extraction, though it is about that. It is also about beginning the generational process of healing the land by leaving no worker behind. And the people who should lead this process of land reclamation and rehabilitation are the people who are the traditional landholders, who have had their treaties violated in Alberta tens of thousands of times over as their land and water have been desecrated and poisoned. Which brings me to reason number 3, why we need a Green New Deal. It is our chance to defend life on Earth and Indigenous land rights at the same time. So David mentioned that other UN study that was upstaged so dramatically by a royal baby, which is the UN report that told us this is known as the IPCC for biodiversity, that we are at a critical turning point in the sixth mass extinction. 1 million plants and animals are at risk of extinction, more than at any other time in human history. Our only hope of beginning to avert this is to engage in habitat restoration on a massive scale, which conveniently enough would also draw a hell of a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it in rehabilitated forests and wetlands. So can this be done? Like all of this, it is hard, but like the IPCC report, that UN report had a reason for hope. It points out that at least a quarter of the land on Earth is traditionally owned, managed, used, or occupied by indigenous peoples. And those territories, though under intense pressure from industry, are also significantly better protected than lands under the control of settler societies. Duh. This is what Pam has been saying and what we have heard again and again. It isn't surprising. Indigenous people have been defending their lands for thousands of years. For this reason, the report states that the knowledge, innovations, and practices, institutions, and values of indigenous people are key to protecting the biodiverse systems on which all of life depends. In other words, when we defend indigenous land rights, when we respect indigenous knowledge, we defend the health of our entire planet, which is what leaders and elders like the late, great Arthur Manuel, as well as visionary organizations like Indigenous Climate Action, have been trying to tell us for so long. All of this means that in rising to the climate crisis, we have a chance to redress and make reparations for that foundational and ongoing genocide that we started with. Not with more inquiries and more empty apologies, but with the return of stolen land, which is what those crimes have always at their root been about. And that begins with the full implementation of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, including the principle of free, prior, and informed consent, as well as the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That is what it means. That is what it means to have a Green New Deal that puts justice and indigenous leadership at its center. These are some of the parameters. In summary, the Green New Deal delivers jobs, it delivers fairness, it delivers justice. Now let's talk about why it's so practical, which brings us to reason number 4 of why we can win a Green New Deal. We can win a Green New Deal because, unlike so many other climate policies of the past, this one can raise an army of supporters, and we're already starting to see a taste of that. Since its launch in the US, the most frequent criticism of the Green New Deal has been that by focusing so much on economic and social justice, it's making climate action a harder sell than a plan that would be more narrowly focused on emissions, right? We've heard that again and again and again. This assumes that the social and economic justice pieces of a Green New Deal are weighing it down. In fact, it is precisely those elements that are lifting it up, because they tell us that we don't need to choose between all of the existential crises that we face, that we can find solutions that address them all at once. Unlike approaches that pass on the costs of transition to working people, the Green New Deal is squarely focused on marrying pollution reduction to the top priorities of the most vulnerable workers and most excluded communities. As the climate justice movement has been arguing for many years, when the communities with the most to gain lead the movement, these movements fight to win because everything is on the line. So, reason number 4, this is the final argument, and it's a little harder to quantify, but it's what I want to leave you with. And because we're in a church, I'm just going to go for it. I believe that the Green New Deal will be good for our mortal souls. In fact, we may have never needed a collective higher purpose project more than we do right now. I'm in a church, which I always find a bit creepy. Let's be real for a minute. It is not only our planet's life support systems that are unraveling, so is our social fabric on so many fronts. We see the symptoms all around us: the rise of fake news, the unhinged conspiracies, the hardening of arteries in our body politic, the epidemics of addiction and despair. We see it in the mass loneliness and isolation of late capitalism. We see it in the way we get lost in our algorithms of envy and anger. We are missing shared assumptions about what we can trust, about what is even real. And we are missing something even more fundamental. As digitally connected as we are, we have never been so severed from the only web that truly matters, the web of interconnection in the fabric of life. A common project on the scale of the Green New Deal would help restore a sense of collective purpose, and we need that right now. It is not a cure for racism or misogyny or homophobia or transphobia. We still have to fight all of these evils head on. But it would give us a sense that we are working together for something bigger than ourselves, something that we are all part of creating. And it would give us an idea that we are going somewhere together, somewhere better than we are right now. And that is healing. It is healing that is badly needed. And I truly believe that as we do this work, we will be changed by it. And we will change other people as we bring them into this struggle. And this is important to understand, because the biggest obstacle we are up against is not climate change denial. It's not even the fossil fuel industry, although that's a big problem. It's hopelessness. It's a feeling that it's all too late, that we've left it too long, that we'll never get the job done on such a short timeline, but it's something even deeper than that. It's a feeling that we aren't good enough to do this, because we've been told that by economists and politicians for so long. For 50 years of neoliberalism, we've been told that all we are atomized, selfish, gratification-seeking units. We were told by Margaret Thatcher that there is no such thing as society, and so no wonder people believe that they can't do this collective work. They have been told that they can't. But we will be changed by this struggle, and we are not starting from scratch, because the groundwork for this moment has been laid by tens of thousands of people and thousands of organizations who have been preparing for this breakthrough for decades, centuries in the case of Indigenous communities that have been protecting their way of life for just this moment when the generation would come that was ready to listen. These forces have been quietly building local models and road testing best practices, and they are ready to roll them out with the speed, with the velocity that is required. For a very long time, this bleak idea of humanity had us in its grips. This idea that we're nothing more than our basest instincts. But something is shifting. As surely as the glaciers are melting and the ice sheets are breaking apart, the solidity of that free market ideology is dissolving too. The center is collapsing. And yes, the right is rising to fill that vacuum, but they are not the only political force that is moving, that is surging. There is also us. There is also the people in this room and in rooms like it that are organizing in unprecedented ways. We are in a race against time, a race against fascism, a race against climate chaos, and we are holding out a new vision for another world, a new vision of what humanity can be. It's coming from the streets, from the schools, from workplaces, from unceded territories. It's a vision that says that all of us combined make up the fabric of society. Margaret Thatcher was wrong. When the future of life is at stake, When the future of life is at stake, there is nothing that we cannot do. We will win a Green New Deal. We will win it because we have to. We will lead from below. We will force our so-called leaders to follow because we are the ones who will finally listen. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.